2023 was a seriously remarkable year for film. I didn't start taking watching movies seriously until probably around 2019, but ever since then, I make it my mission to watch as many movies as I can each year. I worked in a movie theater from mid-2021 through September of last year, and so I had the unique privilege of experiencing a lot of these movies through the eyes of a theater goer and a theater worker, which might have impacted the way I felt about a few of these films. In the years since I started following film, 2023 has been my favorite year I've experienced so far, and I want to tell you why. But first, I want to get a few things out of the way. Number one, the Oscars have not happened yet. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know about the results of Best Picture or whatever. So they haven't happened yet, so take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt knowing that. Number two, I did not get to see every single thing that came out this year. I saw a bunch of movies, which we'll discuss later, but I did not get to see every single film that I wanted to. And number three, I wanted to mention a few of the films that are really big out there that I haven't gotten a chance to see yet. Movies like All of Us Strangers, Fallen Leaves, The Taste of Things, stuff like that. Movies that I'm definitely planning on seeing, but I have not gotten to watch yet. So without further ado, let's get into what made 2023 so great and why I had so much fun at the movies this year. Something you'll notice when you look at 2023 as a whole is how many great films we've gotten from really acclaimed directors. Directors like David Fincher, Paul Schrader, Christopher Nolan, Ridley Scott, Michael Mann, and of course, Martin Scorsese. Films like Ferrari, Master Gardener, Priscilla, they reflect the careers of these filmmakers while still remaining great films on their own. In The Killer, we saw David Fincher back in the world of crime, and Napoleon is one of Ridley Scott's many historical epics. This made this year feel similar to 2019, where we got films from Scorsese, Tarantino, Baumbach, and as you'll see later on this video, I loved a lot of these films. My favorite directors right now are Scorsese and Fincher, and both of them had really incredible showings this year, which is pretty exciting. So many performances this year really stand out, even more than the last few years in my opinion. The competitive Oscar race just feels really intense right now, and it really feels like anything can happen, which I'm not used to in the performance category as much as I am something like the Best Picture or Best Director category, which is pretty exciting. I love De Niro and Leo in Killers of the Flower Moon, and Lily Gladstone was absolutely incredible. She's my pick for Best Actress this year. Emma Stone as well in Poor Things was just wonderful, and Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. were great in Oppenheimer. Actually, the whole cast was pretty stacked in Oppenheimer. There really wasn't a bad performance at all. Movies like Anatomy of a Fall and The Holdovers had really great breakout performances, and Charles Melton in May-December seemed to solely kickstart his film career. I also want to mention Zac Efron in The Iron Claw and the wildly underrated Abby Ryder-Fortson and Rachel McAdams in Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret, as a few performances that I feel like aren't really being talked about enough. I'm leaving out a ton of names like Adam Driver, Penelope Cruz in Ferrari, Glenn Howerton in Blackberry, Greta Lee in Past Lives, Kaylee Spaney in Priscilla, but if I were to name all the great performances we've seen this year, we'd be here all day. I was so moved this year by the Across the Spider-Verse score and the Oppenheimer score. The scores to these films gave the film such a big sense of grandeur, like it made an epic-looking, important film just feel so much more grandiose and so much bigger than it might have been without the music that accompanied it, which really adds a lot. I feel like walking out of one of these films, you catch yourself thinking about the music just as much as you do the cinematography or the performances, because they are just that essential to the finished product. I have a lot of love for the Mutant Mayhem score as well. Anytime Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are together on a project, you know it's going to be special, and they did an amazing job. I think a good score is harder to analyze sometimes than a good shot or a good performance in a scene, because they tend to fall into the background a lot of times. They amplify and elevate the scene they're in, but they do it in a less obvious way sometimes. I have a lot of respect for film composers, and that's definitely something that I would like to do more research on and understand more in the future. Animation popped off in 2023, with films like Across the Spider-Verse and TMNT Mutant Mayhem being wild theater experiences for me personally. The Boy and the Heron might be Hayao Miyazaki's final film. I mean, what a film to end on, right? And the Super Mario Bros. Movie was a hit with younger audiences. I personally haven't seen Nimona or Migration yet, but will at some point in the future. And it was an interesting year for Disney, as Elemental was just fine, and Wish was this big, seminal, important piece of art that was supposed to celebrate the whole company's history over 100 years. And it felt like it just kind of came and went. It felt kind of flat, which leads me directly into my next section. It seems that in 2023, that Disney's grip on viewers is slipping just a bit. They released so many movies and TV shows that I felt were either just fine or not very good at all. Movies like The Marvels, Elemental, and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny were actually decent, and I enjoyed them, some of them quite a bit. But they are a far cry from previous films made by the company. And movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and Wish were just so absolutely mid. I feel like audiences were really starting to get fatigued by superhero movies as well, or at least just standard superhero movies. I mean, working at the theater for the whole year, it felt like there were a lot of movies that people were just not interested in or not showing up for. Countless times we would have literal empty theaters for movies like Shazam and The Flash. Blue Beetle was good, and I loved Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but I didn't love The Flash, and I didn't even bother seeing Shazam and Aquaman 2, which is a new thing for me. I normally go see every single superhero movie that I can. I know that was the consensus with a lot of viewers as well. People just aren't wowed by a middle-of-the-road average comic book film anymore, and honestly, they shouldn't be. People should keep their standards high and want high-quality films, because when the film is good, people will go see it. Guardians and Spider-Verse did great business this year and were beloved. So it's not just a comic book movie problem, it is a bad movie problem. And unlike other years, superhero movies didn't dominate the conversation. Something else did. Working at a movie theater during Barbenheimer was an intense experience. There was nothing bigger than Barbie and Oppenheimer at the movies this year, and people showed up to see them. The long hours and the stressful customer service experiences could be challenging, but overall I had a good time. At the theater I was working at, we got to wear pink and wear festive clothes just to celebrate the release of these two movies, and it was a great bonding experience with my coworkers. Opening weekend was madness. There were more people coming into the theater than I'd ever seen. It was unreal. And it also helped that both movies were actually really good. The word of mouth helped promote the movies even more than the studios did. It was nice seeing so many people excited about just being at the theater. Unlike the multiple disappointing franchise films that came out last year, Barbenheimer did not disappoint. And neither did these next 5 films. So, without further ado, let's get into my top 5 films ranked this year. My 5th favorite film of 2023 is The Boy and the Heron. This was actually a really tough spot to choose. It was really between this or Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, which I loved. I saw a couple times at the theaters. Amazing movie. But I think The Boy and the Heron edges it out just slightly. If this is Miyazaki's final film in his career, it is a crazy good movie to go out on. So many themes from his previous movies manifest here. The idea of a child escaping their real-life circumstances and going on this big grand adventure into a new world is maybe at its best here, second only obviously to Spirited Away. And speaking of Spirited Away, I feel like this movie pulls from a lot of his catalog to make this amalgamation of all of kind of the best of Miyazaki in this really dense and kind of sad movie. I guess there's just something sad about seeing a child start to come of age in a world that Miyazaki creates and watching them grapple with the responsibilities that they've been given. And the fact that parts of this film were based on Miyazaki's childhood makes sense because they are so tangible. The scene at the beginning where it's him running through the fire and the animation is just kind of like pulling pieces off of him a little bit, and his like, it's all the smears. It is just so powerful and really exciting and riveting. It drops you right into the action. And that's definitely heightened by the wonderful score and obviously the breathtaking animation. The hand-drawn animation that obviously took years is on full display here, and it looks amazing. I really connected with this film, and I feel like most people would, fans of animation or not. I will say, if you like Miyazaki's other work, definitely check it out because I feel like it pulls from it a lot. But yeah, really like this one. Speaking of animation, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem was an absolute delight this year. I saw it multiple times in the theater, a couple times at home. Love this movie. As a fan of the Turtles, getting a theatrical representation that was actually good for the first time since 2007 was so cathartic, and it reinforces one of the best things about the Turtles, that each interpretation is different and unique from the last. I love the way the film shows the relationship between the 4 brothers. Being the oldest of 4 brothers, it really connected with me, obviously. The Turtles actually feel like they love each other and have a really close bond that was built in friendship and not just ninja training. Like, they actually feel like family members and that they love each other. It's not just that they're like colleagues, I guess. I like that they crack jokes the way real teenagers would, and the way the script was written, you can tell that the actors had a lot of fun riffing and goofing off in the recording booth. I think atmosphere is seriously important when you're making a Turtles adaptation. Whether it's the darker tone of the first 90s film or the lighthearted nature of the 80s cartoon, knowing what tone you're going for helps sell the world you're creating. And Mutant Mayhem does this expertly. It creates a pretty fun atmosphere while allowing its story to have serious moments that make you take the story seriously. For example, there's a moment where the boys want to join the real world and get scolded by their dad, Master Splinter. And you genuinely feel for the Turtles. In this moment, the stakes aren't world-ending monsters, but just kids who want to see the world and find out who they are. And because of the way the narrative is crafted, it hits like it's the most important thing in the world. Speaking of Master Splinter, the other characters in the film are really fun, particularly Superfly. I love Ice Cube, and he delivers some really hilarious lines as the villain. I also just can't stress enough how good the score is. I know I said it earlier, but Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross never miss. I gotta mention briefly how much I love the visual style that this film has. Like, they take some inspiration from Spider-Verse and throw some dirt on it and make it look a little gross, which fits this universe so well. Everyone is kind of ugly, and it gives this movie a real distinct visual look. I absolutely loved this movie, cannot wait for the sequel and to see how they do Shredder. After Barbie, this film easily had the most momentum in mainstream culture all year. You couldn't escape this film, whether at the theater, on social media, or even in water cooler conversations. Oppenheimer to me represents something that I absolutely love. An original film from an acclaimed filmmaker with a big budget and big stars that makes a lot of money and takes over the conversation. It was such a thrilling experience seeing Oppenheimer opening weekend. Just seeing how Nolan was going to show the Trinity test, seeing how he would portray such a complicated figure, and seeing what his interpretation of a nuclear explosion would look like. And Nolan really delivered. I'm not the biggest Nolan guy. I love a few of his films, but I don't love everything that he does. But after seeing Oppenheimer, it shot right up to the number 2 spot in my ranking. It is that good. I think Nolan paired with a screenplay this interesting is a match made in heaven. Scenes of just straight dialogue are made so much more interesting by the well-paced editing and wonderful performances. I feel like everyone in the cast brought their A-game. I love how the film tackles the ideas of morality and portrays the idea of an atomic bomb in a way that leaves it up to the viewer to decide how they feel about it. I mean, it's pretty obvious how you should feel about it. And the scene of Oppenheimer in the gym where he's kind of facing the reality maybe of what he's done was so powerful. The comparisons to Prometheus and about how a man can steal fire from the gods and suffer the consequences of that action are really well done. I feel like there isn't much that I can add to the discourse of this film as it's already been discussed and talked about so heavily, but I was so into it. I said it in my Letterboxd review already, but when you match Nolan's directing with a great screenplay, score, performances, you can't really go wrong. Oppenheimer might be a masterpiece, but it wasn't even my favorite historical epic that came out in 2023, and hopefully that shows you how good of a movie year this was. Martin Scorsese graced movie theaters in October with the release of Killers of the Flower Moon, and it was an incredible experience. I'm a big Scorsese fan, but since I got into film in 2019 and The Irishman was a Netflix film, this was really my first time seeing a new Scorsese movie in theaters. So the hype I had for this movie was off the charts. Leo and De Niro are my 2 favorite actors, and so them matched with arguably the greatest living director only added fuel to the anticipation fire. And as usual, Marty delivered. With a 3-hour and 26-minute runtime, I can honestly say not a moment was wasted. This film was longer than Oppenheimer, but to me it felt shorter due to the edit and the pacing of the story. I think that if you miss out on movies with long runtimes just because they're long, you're really missing out on some pretty incredible art. A film has to earn its runtime, and Killers definitely does. Exploring the idea of how a community of people can be exploited by evil people just for money, and the lack of justice they receive, can be really heavy. But in my opinion, the film handles it with a lot of grace while not shying away from the reality of the situation. This is shown primarily through Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, and the journey her character goes on is really heartbreaking. Like Oppenheimer, this film leaves a lot up to interpretation, and her relationship with Leonardo DiCaprio's character Ernest is a great example of this. Ernest might truly love Molly, but if you're willing to consistently hurt someone you love for personal gain, can you really call that love? This film tackles some really horrific moments in American history, and the writing for the characters responsible makes you really invested. De Niro's character was also a standout. He had such a long career, but when he's with Scorsese, you know he's going to give you a special performance. This movie says so much about humanity and cruelty and the selfishness of man and what true justice is. Because there isn't always a super cathartic resolution to everything in life, and the film ends leaving you with the reality of that fact. I've seen this film twice and cannot wait to watch it again. I think it's going to be one that grows a lot in cultural importance over time, to the point where if you tell someone you haven't seen this movie, they'd look at you funny. And rightfully so, because this is a film that needs to be seen by everyone. Okay, it feels weird to follow up 2 3.5-hour long historical dramas about tragedies of American history with a silly Spider-Man animated movie, but it has to be this way, because come on, it's me. What else could have possibly taken the number 1 spot this year? My favorite film of 2023 is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, the sequel to the 2018 film Into the Spider-Verse, a masterpiece in its own right. First of all, I can't remember the last time an animated movie was my favorite film of the year, let alone a sequel, but this film deserves to be here. As anyone who spent a second on this channel knows, I love the character of Spider-Man. But just a love for a character is not enough for a movie to be automatically my number 1. No Way Home wasn't my favorite film of 2021, for example, but this film is not just a good Spider-Man film. It is a masterclass in animation. The way that every universe has its own art style, its own visual language, and sometimes its own frame rate is incredible. The character work here with Miles and Gwen is just as good as it was in the first film, and I actually find Miles' character a bit more interesting in this movie. Dealing with the moral quandaries about how to save the lives of as many people as possible is such a good thing to base a Spider-Man story on. It's pretty essential to the text. Miles' relationship with his dad is done so well and has some pretty emotional moments to it. And I also have to say how much I love how this film handles Miguel O'Hara as Spider-Man 2099. He kind of becomes the main antagonist of this film, and that choice works really well as he isn't painted as this sinister, evil guy, but as a hero who's also trying just to do the right thing, same as Miles. The two are an interesting mirror for each other, showing what Miles could become if he went a little too far with his idea of responsibility. And every new character they introduce is so great, especially Hobie Brown and Spider-Man India. There is so much life in this film. It is so colorful and just full of wonder. It truly feels on the level of a Miyazaki movie. Every time you enter a new world, you just want to explore and peel back the layers of the movie. And for an artist, it's an enormous well of inspiration. This might genuinely be the most visually impressive film I have ever seen. And the score is top tier as well. I mean, Daniel Pemberton creating such an iconic, memorable score that I've had stuck in my head since I saw this. And the soundtrack was just wonderful as well. Multiple scenes were really elevated by the songs they chose. They make the scenes feel even more memorable while not being distracting. This is the movie I watched the most this year. I watched it 5 times in theaters and have watched it a couple times now at home. It just gets better and better with every viewing. There will be a joke or a visual gag that you didn't really notice the first few times, and it just feels so special, like there's always something new to discover. I would talk about specific scenes in this movie that stand out, but genuinely there is not a scene in this film that I don't love. I will highlight these shots, however. Like, dude, these have stuck with me since I left the theater. I loved every second of Across the Spider-Verse, and I cannot wait to watch it again. It truly stood above every other film this year and was by far my favorite film of 2023. In 2023, I watched 310 films, which I think is an all-time record for me, which is pretty exciting. I watched 616 hours of films and saw 61 new films that released in 2023. According to Letterboxd, my most watched actor was Tobin Bell, due to me watching the entire Saw franchise in October, and my most watched director was Martin Scorsese for obvious reasons. This is my ranking of the entirety of 2023 at this point in time. And this is my ranking for Best Picture nominees. Obviously, I would love to see Killers of the Flower Moon win, but I'm pretty sure we all know that Oppenheimer is going to win. And I'm pretty excited about that because I loved Oppenheimer and it definitely deserves the win. Some of the best memories I had all year were going to see movies at my local theater with my friends and just having a good time. There's so many good movies to choose from this year, it always felt like there was something good in the theater. I can confidently say this has been my favorite year of cinema since I started getting into film, and I'm really excited to see what movies 2024 brings us. In 2024, I'm really looking forward to seeing Dune 2, The Challengers, Maxine, and Kung Fu Panda 4. Maybe I'll make another video like this when the year ends, I don't know. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.